This is the Tuesday, May the 6th, 2025 version of our series on entrepreneurship and Asian high-tech industries. And thank you very much for your patience as we tried to get the different sound systems to talk to each other. I'm delighted that to talk to us about ecosystem building in Southeast Asia, we have Dr. Benjamin Teet, who is a Stanford PhD, and is now the Vice President of National University of Singapore Enterprise, which is kind of the technology commercialization of the university. And his specific portfolio is ecosystem building. He has been the Vice Dean of Research and Innovation at the US. He is still an Associate Professor, the Dean's Chair Associate Professor in Materials Science Engineering. And he's also a serial entrepreneur, co-founded several companies, one of which was acquired and one of which is Y Combinator company that is now in the growth stage. He has been a biodesign global innovation postdoctoral fellow here at Stanford, and he was named as the World Economics Forum's Young Scientist of the Year in 2019. So we're incredibly honored and delighted that, Ben, you could come home to the farm and talk to us this afternoon. I'm going to let you take it over from this point, and we'll come back. I'll come back during Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Richard. Actually, I actually took his class many years back.
This class?
This exact same class, and I remember it very fondly. And I remember that I learned so much about the semiconductor industry and supply chains. And I never thought I'll be back today, but I'm glad to be back. And I'm pretty sure that an AI system wouldn't be able to figure out the complications things that we just did. But anyway, it's fun. Really excited to be here, and I see familiar faces. I have some of my colleagues back in Stanford when I was a graduate student. I see some Singaporeans. Really delighted to be here, and also to the online folks. As I understand, this is also streaming live. I shall talk to you about my experience building startup ecosystem in Singapore through the lens of an entrepreneur, essentially myself, plus the lens of many other entrepreneurs that I was inspired by in Singapore. So I'll just start with my journey. So I was like hang on. Okay, so I was a PhD student many years back. I started in 2007 onwards as a PhD student. And I always remember that my goal back then was to publish a science paper. And I actually did it. And I was quite happy that I did it, but it took 6 years. And I was wondering, man, did I just waste 6 years to publish a science paper? So I figured that maybe it's time to look for another way to do innovation, because I really wanted to bring products to market that people actually use. I joined the Singapore Stanford Biodesign Fellowship, which actually essentially was the Stanford Biodesign program that Singapore partnered with Stanford University, where they sent 4 fellows from Singapore to learn about innovation in the healthcare space. And the idea was that instead of creating technology and trying to solve a problem, we looked at the problem first and then developed technologies that would address that problem. We scanned through 400 over problems, and we finally landed on one problem. There was a home-use balloon catheter system, and we were successfully acquired after 5 years of starting the company. I was quite lucky because given the state of the ecosystem back then in Singapore, it took me almost a year to get a first angel investment, right? So fortunately, because of this experience and the track record, the second company, which is a YC company, took less than a week to get the first check from an angel investor. It was much larger, 5 times larger. And now we are selling in 6 countries with $10 million raised. And hopefully we get that liquidity event. But in startup world, nothing is certain. What is certain is the ability and the persistence to bring your products to market. So that's what I learned. Even coming from a ecosystem perspective, as a whole, after 5 years, you do see that there is some growth in the ability to have risk capital coming into higher risk companies, and actually the appetite from Bay Area investors to actually fund innovations coming from Southeast Asia. Thereafter, I started my third company as a faculty member in the National University of Singapore. And we closed the seed round within a day, and we got the check in pretty quickly within a week. So you can see that from the risk capital perspective, at least from my experience, it has been growing quickly. There are increased risk appetite, provided that there are enough founders to actually ask for the money. So it becomes a very chicken and egg problem in any startup ecosystem growth. Essentially, if you're a mechanical engineer or you love cars, it's also called the cold start problem. And Singapore as an economy actually has invested quite significant amounts of time, resources, man hours, and capital to actually elevate our capacity for innovation. In 2004, there was just recently, the economists actually did a study and they actually plot population versus innovation capacity of different countries. And if you look at a per capita level, Singapore is actually doing pretty well relative to Sweden, Japan, US, UK, China, and so on. So what did we actually do that allowed us to so rapidly emerge from essentially what was a backwater way for traders trading commodities to the innovation hub? I think I was quite fortunate to also see this rise in innovation capacity over the last, I would say now 11 years I'm back. And back then, actually, when I first considered going back, I did think that, okay, it's actually nice to be on a economy or around economies that actually started to get affluent, and there was enough population to support that kind of affluence. So I'll just play a very short video of a clip of how Singapore actually compare to other advanced economies in terms of financial status as well as high-tech industry.
This tiny island nation is smaller than New York City, but it's the wealthiest country in Asia and one of the richest in the world.
Its GDP per capita itself has surpassed the likes of the UK, the US, France, and other developed countries.
Over 6 decades, Singapore has transformed itself from a colonial trading port to a buzzing financial center that's envied the world over. And it's held up as an example for any country seeking to grow a robust, high-tech economy.
Just as a case in point, actually, Singapore produces close to 20% of the semiconductor devices and also equipment. In terms of the financial status, right, for those who are unsure where Singapore is in the world map, certainly we are not quite near China. We're actually on the southern tip of Malaysia, and we're a tiny island, probably, like the video said, smaller than New York City. But in terms of the financial capacity, we have dramatically increased it from $430 billion in 2004. Back then, I just was still an undergraduate student. And today, just in 2023, we are $5.4 trillion. Right? So there's a lot of wealth sloshing around in Singapore. And the question is, how do we deploy that wealth and what kind of risk assets? I think there's a lot of changes going on that I think make Singapore exciting. In addition, the region around Singapore, Southeast Asia, is also fairly exciting, presents interesting opportunities. They are slightly in different phases of the innovation economy progress, right? We have roughly a GDP combined of $4.25 trillion and about 700 million people, give or take. Many of these countries actually grew GDP over 4% year on year in the last 10 years. Vietnam, for example, has raised their per capita income 11 times since 2000. We are roughly a 10 country bloc, with the latest being East Timor. It's in this ecosystem and environment, right, that I actually developed the innovations coming from my research as well as working with other founders. Primarily, a lot of my innovation today comes in the university environment from academia. And I returned to academia in 2017 after starting my first company, and then did my second company and now my third, all sort of witnessing and experiencing the high growth of the innovation capacity. So NUS, we are not too far behind Stanford. We're just 3 places behind, some references or benchmarks. But I think more importantly is the ability for the faculty, the students, and the research staff to actually participate bring ideas to market, and it is not without challenges, I must say, and I'll share a bit of some of these challenges later, and how we have systematically, the university within Singapore, tried to address some of these gaps relative to the Bay Area ecosystem and others. So this year is actually our 120th year anniversary. Singapore is at its 60th year anniversary. So in some sense, the university predates the incorporation of our republic. And many would say that Singapore is like a startup, right? Some people refer to us as Singapore Inc. I think that certainly a country shouldn't be run like a startup. However, we do have certain attributes that make us, it almost forces us to think very much like a startup. There are finite resources. We do not have any natural resources. We only have talent, right? Which is most cases like a startup. Typically, when you start, you only have people. What have got going for us is the ability to invest. And over the years, we do build out a reputation for hosting some of these assets and capital. We need to go up on the risk asset class in terms of capital deployment, but over time, I see that the friction of doing that will be significantly reduced, definitely in the next 10 years. So my own research actually lies in the interface between sensors and AI. And frankly, when I graduated from Stanford, I did not think that I would actually see humanoid robots on a weekly basis on my LinkedIn feed doing some crazy stuff, right? So that's why I set out to try to address this idea that machines can be intelligent. And how do machines become intelligent? That is actually through data. And we do have a lot of data today. And now we have some advanced models that try to understand text data. There's so much to the world. Which is why I set up a group that does physical sensing, right? To actually develop physical data for the machines that might come online and start to use this data in combination with text. So I've done a few research topics, which I won't talk about. I'd like to share with you one video, which I think is why I still need to work very hard in the next 10 years to address some of the problems with humanoid robotics. This is actually a live video, right, of some of the world's most advanced robots, Boston Dynamics robot. Unfortunately, fails, and this is actually could be catastrophic if there was a child, right next to the robot. So the ability of machines to sense the world physically is still limited by the ability to actually convert the analog signals to the machine. Of course, there are other considerations like power and so on, but we have made rapid advances in actuating some of these robots, right? Across the world, I think almost like a race to see who has the most capable humanoid robots. But the truth is, there's still a big gap to what I would say, many people call it AGI, but I would say human intelligence still trumps if you look at the intelligence per watt type of task. Right? So this is actually a summary that we published a simple report on, where we actually looked at the number of model parameters, what we call cognitive intelligence, versus number of data, right? Amount of sensors that provide the data. And this is the envelope of where many of these research groups are at right now. We are definitely several orders of magnitude, 3 to 5 orders of magnitude behind what the humans can do as yet. Which is why I think that in order to cover this AGI gap, there's still a lot to be done. And there's ideas around world models and so on by some of the leading thought leaders, some of the leaders in AI, which is why I started to look at this from a commercial standpoint. Can we, over time, address this while extracting and providing value to people? So one of which is actually to provide data for robots. We developed a very fast prototype skin that operates at kilohertz on par with humans. It scales to very large number of sensors and is able to grab very fragile objects. Then we discovered that actually we could also sense human postures, right? Who has back pain here? Lower back pain. People, right? The number one cause of lower back pain is actually bad posture. Most of us don't know we have bad posture, but I'm pretty sure that by the time I say it, you're already sitting straight. Now, what if a skin that you wear it in completely imperceptible to your daily living is able to tell you that you're not giving a good posture when you're doing pickup and sitting? So we developed from the technology for robots, we started to think about another use case where we actually wrap the sensors around a human, reduce the high-risk posture. And we actually have the capability to reduce the chance of high-risk posture by over 67% in a real-world trial, a very large logistics customer. So I think that we have a chance to become unicorn. I don't know yet, but if you look at where Singapore is in terms of the number of unicorns generated per million, that's not so bad, right? So the odds are roughly 2.5 unicorns per million people. This compares quite favorably to countries like the US, which is a much larger economy, and to some other advanced economies that have chosen certain areas of development, right? Estonia was very clearly is in blockchain technologies. So how did we actually end up getting from a very backwater shown in the video to a country that produces roughly at least 1 to 2 unicorns a year, and actually the university plays a very big part of that. So first, we actually started a program we call NOC Overseas College, and that was in 1999, right? Just around the dot-com boom era, where we started to send students to locations like Stanford University and the Bay Area to work as startups, right? This was in 2001, we started to send our first batch. And after 10 years of sending students to Stanford, many of them actually did drink the Kool-Aid like I did, and want to start companies. There was no place to host them. So we created a physical location called Block 71. I'll play a video about it later, where we highly concentrate these startup founders, basically aspirations and coffee and so on, just allow them to continue developing their ideas a little bit further, right? So there's the idea of having a localized facility, almost like a factory, if you will, to produce startups. And then we realized our market was too small, and we needed to go overseas. And we actually started our first center in San Francisco in 2015, right? Roughly 10 years ago. And the center is still highly active. And we've then since then expanded to Asia. And in the 2018, there was a thinking around the government and actually NUS as a university, filing a lot of patents, much like Stanford, right? Just like I was when I was a graduate student. How can we actually make use of these patents, right? Bring them to the market. We started a structured program for deep technology innovation, 2018, and then since then we've continued to make investments through this program, and I'll share a little bit about some of these later. So fast forward 25 years later, after the incorporation or setting up of NUS Enterprise, which I must say is a very daring experiment by the university. We've completely funded it through our own investments together with government support along the way, right, to build this ecosystem from scratch with entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs. Maybe many of you like to actually bring a startup to become large and hopefully impact the world, right? In total, the risk capital they've raised is roughly $12 billion US. And the way we help them grow significantly outside of our very small, narrow, constrained island is actually to export them. We are very fortunate to be able to land them in ecosystems like the US and Japan, Vietnam, and Indonesia, and also China, right? To bring their ideas to test at larger ecosystems, right? It's certainly not easy. Many of them tried, did not succeed. But over the years, over the last 12 to 13 years, with a few successes, many of them have gone on to become unicorns. PetSnap, I'll share about them. We have a few others from our ecosystem, where we actually were the first entity to make the investment into them, right? Using typically a very small convertible note instrument, plus other things that we throw in kind. So what we hope to do is to address the various gaps we think that is important for a startup ecosystem, for any startup ecosystem. And I know for the fact that many countries now are seriously looking at innovating, and I must say the journey is not easy, but there are really 3 things that I think is important for any ecosystem. First, actually in order of importance, talent. Because without people, you will not be able to essentially do anything. And certainly with the video that I've shown you about robots, no robot is going to do a startup yet, basically. The facilities and ability to bring people together, right? If you're talking about research facility as well as spaces, right? Innovation spaces, those need to be kind of thought out. You need capital, risk capital, not just people with money, but people with money and networks and know-how. And so over time, what we hope to do is to create a flywheel, starting from idea generation all the way to global scale. And this takes a multi-year and multi-phase approach to do that. And at the university, as an ecosystem at NUS Enterprise, really experimented in different ways, and we've tried and failed sometimes. But over the years, we actually started to get a handle on how to design programs for bringing ideas to market. PetSnap is one example, right? These two students actually, one from engineering, one from computing, actually was one of the earliest batches of NOC students who came to the Valley, drank the Kool-Aid, and wanted to start a company. And when they started in Singapore at NUS, they were extremely small and they couldn't figure out how to get to scale. And we started to lend them to our Block 71s overseas to get to the market, to be closer to the market, to build solutions that address more customers. And now they are hitting about $100 million in revenue Q2 of last year. And they should be on track for some, hopefully, a big liquidity event. So I'll show you this space that we actually curated over the years. It's called Block 71.
Block 71 takes its name from its birthplace, the Block 71 building within the Ayer Rajah Industrial Estate in Singapore. It is there that NUS Enterprise, along with Singtel Innovate and the then Media Development Authority of Singapore, came together to avert its impending demolition through seizing the opportunity to establish a home and community for budding entrepreneurs. The success of the Block 71 initiative was further fueled by support from government agencies like Spring, and JTC's speed to retrofit and rebuild nearby buildings to develop this entrepreneurial enclave into JTC Launchpad.
And actually in 2014, not too long ago, in 2011, we started the space. We actually petitioned the government not to destroy it, demolish it. We actually made it most packed entrepreneurial ecosystem. And the way we do it is we put them in tall buildings, highly concentrated, right, in Singapore, much like the public housing, if you're familiar. But essentially, we took light factories and converted them to, instead of providing them the space to produce goods, we provided them the space to produce companies. That was the idea, right? Can we do that at scale? I think over the years, we've started to think it could be possible. And we actually expanded the ability to Southeast Asia, countries around us. And we set up an office in Indonesia, right? Especially with a few conglomerates in Indonesia. We found founders like Adi on the left, on the right, on your right here, who wanted to do something for Indonesia and also for the environment. And so he came up with the idea that maybe we can make sustainable leather. And there's also another reason behind that, is that many of the manufacturing of goods in Indonesia, for example, shoes, many has materials actually made in Southeast Asia. 58% of an branded shoe, I shall name the brand, is actually made in Southeast Asia. And so we actually, over the years, partnered with entities like JREs in Japan to help some of these companies bring their sustainable solutions outside of their country. I'll just play a very short video of what inspired them.
MYCL, let me show you how we turn agroforestry waste into a sustainable alternatives for leather made out of mushroom mycelium.
I live in a place that's supposed to be the lung of the earth with 100 million hectares of rainforest. But unfortunately, every year, 100 million tons of CO2 emissions are emitted from burning agri-crop waste.
So we saw problems and opportunities as two sides of the same coin. We asked the farmers not to burn their waste, but sell it to us so we can process it to grow leather-like materials with mushrooms. We can create any wearable objects that usually use leather. We can replace it with mylia. It looks like leather, it's natural like leather, but it's not leather, it's mycelium. it's better.
Yeah, and I actually have a sample here if you want to feel it. It actually feels very much like leather. Pretty interesting. And they've now scaled up in Japan. And they
Can you tell about who it was who developed this? Was that connected to NUS or was it?
Yeah, so the founders actually did a research project in Singapore
Okay,
as part of this experience, and then they kind of continue to scale over time.
okay.
So they actually leverage some of the research facilities in Singapore. So I've also shared that we started to look at translating deep technology into actual products and companies. So through the graduate research program, right, GRIP, we actually helped founders like, I think, let me try to see, and Grace. This is Engwei, and this is Grace. They not only founded a company, they also actually found each other because they're actually a husband and wife couple from our ecosystem, which was a nice story. Both of them were NOC students who then went on to our GRIP program and then now starting a company. And they're actually developing underwater robotics, autonomous robots that can map out underwater assets for large companies. And they are now in deployment in various countries, both in Europe and US. Actually, we also have in the audience Phi Inc., X-Phi Inc. The founders, can you just raise your hand? Them, right? And so they actually are in town for a major cybersecurity conference, right? RSA, and they joined Block 71 not too long ago. They have a huge patent family around AI-powered hardware security. Right? So if you are interested, please talk to them. So they also leveraged our ability to help them land in countries outside of Singapore. So when I took on the role of VP ecosystems building, I was wondering what exactly can I do for Singapore and for our ecosystem. So one of the things we're very good at, if you don't already know by now, is to get money. To raise money to pitch to people. In this case, I pitched to the government to support us with a roughly $40 million research innovation program to support next generation research projects in the research lab and translate them in a faster, more accelerated fashion into products and services globally. Right. So we partnered with another local university, right, to help Singapore as a nation build a strong innovative culture, innovation language, just like what I had experienced personally in the Bay Area and Stanford University. So we also have programs, new programs. Again, we have managed to pitch to a big Japanese corporate, publicly listed company with a multi-billion-dollar market cap to fund some of our programs at Block 71 Singapore. If you are a founder interested to build a company out of Singapore, there are favorable economic environments. To do that, feel free to scan the QR code. UMass has been a fantastic university and we remain committed to innovation, which is why we actually invested in a new building, right? We'll be launching September this year. If you're in town, September 16, you can come to the iCube Innovation 3 building, right? That we have completely outfitted to allow faster exchange of ideas, monetization to investments. So over the years, I think we have done a decent job. I'll give us maybe an A-, B+ in ecosystem building, but we are still early in building out the ability to quickly and rapidly translate innovations and ideas to large-scale, hyperscale companies. Right? These are just some of the programs I've shared. We are continuing to experiment and developing new programs. And frankly, I was very happy when I met Xian, who is also a Stanford alumni and a PhD, and we met also another alumni you might know from Yahoo, just last week actually, at Stanford University, to try to really develop this. And he's now the Senior Vice President, overseeing all of innovation. It brings to us a tremendous wealth of experience in tech transfer and venture capital. I think more importantly, I'd like to really point to the fact that we value people and we have a team of people behind the entire enterprise effort to advance not just Singapore's economy, but really the whole of our networked offices around the world in Southeast Asia, US, to facilitate exchange between ideas and impact. End of the day, that's what matters. So if you have not been to Singapore, I welcome you. It's quite a beautiful city, right? And certainly thank you for your attention.
Let me start off with a couple of questions and then we'll move to questions from the audience. Those of you on Zoom, if you have a question, please type it in the chat window. So Singapore is a wealthy, small economy, which means that the government and industry can put quite a bit of money into research and development. How do people in Singapore keep up with the right directions of research to go?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And that's one of the reasons I'm here actually.
Okay.
In the Bay Area, trying to understand where the leading frontiers of capital investments I think there are certain ideas on where the investments could happen, because a lot of times things that reach hyperscale, Google, Meta, and so on, they took 20 years, right? But they are often born in times of challenging economic conditions, like from bust era, right? And so I think this is a very perfect timing actually for us to really understand where the long-term investments and the capital deployment could be in. And the hope is that over time we bridge this and create a superhighway of sorts between economies and ecosystems like the Bay Area and Singapore.
So another kind of sort of cultural question. In Asia, we had a speaker last week who was talking about how parents really wanted their children to go to prestige companies and value stability and so on and so forth. So how does that look in Singapore? You have a lot of young people who really want to be entrepreneurs, or is it sort of like, maybe I better do this because I might not get another job?
I think that if you were to ask me this question when I was a graduate student, I'll probably say most people would just want a stable job. In fact, parents discouraged children to actually be an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what has changed over the last 20 years or so is that there have been consistent investment in opportunities for entrepreneurship as an alternative career option for any students. Actually, over time, we realized that the support that we give actually allows them to shine through their entrepreneurial spirit to shine through.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Singapore cannot play the honest game because we're a small country. So we will have to work very hard to identify, I would say, people that have some unique capability and drive to want to do some things a bit differently.
Yeah. No, I think, and I was just in Singapore a few weeks ago. One really unusual thing about Singapore is that there are so many people of different backgrounds, different languages, 4 different national languages. And so you have a place where people are kind of not only looking toward each other, but they're looking out all across Asia, as far as India and to the west, and as far as China to the north. Do you think that you need this kind of multi-ethnic, kind of population, whatever, in order to be entrepreneurial?
I think it's an advantage if you play it as an advantage. For example, when we first started our first company, right, out of the 4 fellows in the Singapore Stanford by Design program, we came from Malaysia, China, Indonesia, Singapore. I think this ability to work across cultures is not easy, but if you can activate it, it can be quite powerful as a way to gain some risk capital.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask a little bit more about the investor situation in Singapore. So Singapore has a very large sovereign wealth fund. Temasek is what I'm thinking of. In addition, who are the investors in Singapore? How much of them are kind of really connected to the government? How much of them are foreign investors? Or you have a lot of Singapore investors outside Singapore too.
Yeah, I think starting in around 2014 onwards, we started to see certain government programs and policies that encouraged venture capital to co-invest with government entities. So the Singapore government has created a suite of investment offices, government run, to co-invest with venture capital funds identified.
Now, I gotta admit, government venture capital sounds kind of like an oxymoron.
Yeah, so yeah, no, it's a good question, right? I often think that it's a double-edged sword, but in Singapore, because of our limited resources and size, we try not to leave too much things to chance. Right. And in order for us to get that get over a very steep learning curve and also a steep growth. So we will have to take the good and the bad at the same time.
So for a number of years, the Singapore government would have big national projects. I think, was it Connect One Singapore or something? I can't remember the name, but really about internet development and about advanced computing development. What's happening in the advanced areas that you're in? Are the sensor and AI area something that there's a lot of government support for, or is it mostly academic?
So it's tremendous the amount of support given. Just give you some perspective. In the past 30 years or so, we have spent close to $60 billion investing in R&D. Right, and that's largely run by the National Research Foundation, the NSF. Balance
of NSF,
and they have, because of our limited pool of resources, we were quite selective in areas, and we tend to have a large part in more applied sciences, a small application towards primary scientific curiosity-driven research.
So really, from my perspective, Singapore has so many of the elements of a really good ecosystem. Not only do you have well-educated talent who are now taking risks, and you've got capital, and you've got the service providers who know how to help. Dun & Bradstreet always lists Singapore as like number 1 or number 2 best place in the world to do business. And so you have, Singapore really serving as the hub for a lot of the entrepreneurial activity all across Southeast Asia. People will register their company in Singapore and actually develop the business in Jakarta or in Kuala Lumpur or wherever, right? My question is, what does Singapore need? What would you love to see more of in Singapore?
I think we would need to see more ambitious goals.
Okay.
That's one.
Aim high.
Aim high. That's one. The other thing is we also need a group of individuals that have been exposed to what skill means, so that they can then over time develop a propensity to be confident about their abilities. Essentially, we have to try to punch above our weight and be very confident doing so. That's certainly not easy. Many successful examples or models. I think we are slowly building that through some of these companies, right? But they're not yet at a Technicon or level. Yeah, but we do see a few examples of companies that have addressed it from a business innovation angle. Grab, for example, has been the super app for Southeast Asia, right? They actually moved to Singapore because of our transparent economic operating environment. We also have C, which is a very big company that started from a niche market in gaming and now gone into in a big way to e-commerce, and they are now worth over $80 billion US.
Okay, so I'm starting to get questions on Zoom. Let me open the floor to questions here, though. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was in Asia 2003 and went back post-COVID, almost didn't recognize Singapore from 2003. So great job, right? So, but we're looking at US-Sino relationship and it's just big bombshell. And as far as I consider, I think we're start of a long-term Cold War. Okay, this is just a start. How does that impact Southeast Asia, especially Singapore, especially when it comes to, for a environment, fostering this economic entrepreneurship environment, which stability is very important for people to want to start a business, right? When there's risk, people tend to button down on a safe choice, and there'll be less of that company.
Okay.
What do you think?
It's a great question. Thanks for asking. So you're in Singapore, Insia.
Yes.
What is your favorite food?
The 那骨肉茶那个
Bak kut teh.
肉骨茶对
Yeah, right.
in hawker center.
Great. So herbal soup with pork type of very nice, super tasty. Like today, you still can get it. So my point is that we are a highly stable economy. Despite our size, we have to be anchored in openness, transparency, and the ability to integrate multicultural identities. We always do that. So from that point of view, I think we would do just fine. Just fine. And in many ways, we try to be, it's a tough question, but we try to be as neutral in the sense that we value strong governance, we value talent investment, we value impact to society. I think those things won't change. And so in this way, we probably can write out different things that the world will have to throw at us.
Excellent. Just for everybody, we featured a government program in Singapore a couple of years ago in one of our fall seminars that had to do with the digital economy. And it was a program to develop ways to measure the responsibility of AI. And one of the brilliant things that they did is they had people from large companies, small companies, the academic world, from all over, including both China and the US. And it's very hard to find a place where you can get both people in, all these groups in the same room. I think Singapore may play a important role. Go ahead.
I want to follow Professor Richard's perspective. Because Singapore already attract a significant amount of foreign investment, especially there are over 2,000 family office for wealthy people sell.
It's a wait list of 1,000.
Yeah.
Ticket size of probably 50
So
million.
EDB create like GIP program, this kind. But I'm wondering that if this foreign investment contribute positively to the startup and ecosystem in Singapore.
Fantastic. Again, we did a lot of experiments. The government actually has been actively figuring out how to activate that capital, right? So they're making some certain tweaks in the policies that govern these funds and where we can invest in to generate certain favorable taxation conditions for them, right? So over time, we are tweaking it to ensure that there is enough assets allocated to higher risk type of investments. So there are some tweaks. When we first started, I think certainly, it's again the chicken and egg, right? If we don't even have the wait list of 1,000, what's the point of changing the tax laws? So in this case, we're now in a favorable position to start thinking about, can we tweak it so that these family offices not only see it as a safe harbor for their funds, also is able to actually invest so that overall they achieve certain impactful outcomes. Many of them, at least, I think most people want to see impactful outcomes. So the question is, how do we nudge them in the direction? There's been some changes to the tax laws to allow this. And they were quite recent. And so over time, again, Singapore is like a startup, we have to keep iterating. Yeah.
So can you tell us what is required to qualify to be a startup company in the middle of Block 71? Is it only companies that really were started in Singapore, or can foreign companies go in? And I'm kind of related to this as a question that came in on Zoom about the role of EDB, the Economic Development Board. And really the promotion of Singapore startups is Enterprise Singapore. So there are two different government organizations, one kind of inbound and one kind of outbound. How does Block 71 fit into that picture?
Again, we are very open, right? We welcome all identities and all entrepreneurs of all stripes and sizes. If you're very small, we give you free coffee, sometimes free food. Hopefully the chance to network and meet great either founders or investors. I think that over time we've started to see that the ability to have a safe, harmonized environment, almost with the same kind of interior design, provides a space that entrepreneurs feel relatively comfortable in a job, a career that is extremely young.
Yeah.
So I think we essentially try to be a home away from home for many of entrepreneurs that might not be native.
Do they have to be native Singaporean
No,
companies?
they don't. We welcome
Okay,
all,
okay. From all.
including from the US to Asia, from Japan to Asia, both ways.
Okay, great. Questions from the board? Go ahead, Gina.
Sir, I want to know that what is the challenge of Block 71 in Sabathion? I visited your office.
Right.
Yeah, and I talked to the entrepreneur there, but I want to see from your point, what is the challenge to run a kind of a government backed up incubator in Silicon Valley?
Well, first, I think, and I think I had a really nice conversation on many fronts on this. I think first we have to figure out what we really need to do, right, for the founders. And because they come in all different configurations, it's very hard to find one program that fits everyone, especially when there's just so varying levels of knowledge in venture building, right? From even just within the university, we see a lot of differences. Within Singapore, even less homogeneous, right? Much far dispersion, right? If you look at the curves, highly dispersed type of capability. So what we're trying to do actually with these national programs is to be able to create a language of innovation. So they understand what's product market fit, they know what's customer discovery, they know what's design thinking, they know they can at least do a basic financial model. So over time, we try to increase the capability, right? Or basically, in some sense, like raise the tide for all these companies, so that they can access markets bigger, like the US, in a more efficient manner. The challenge is that the investment dollars often within an ecosystem tend to stay within the ecosystem. So the founders themselves have to be ready to figure out a structure and a working model that allows them to move between their home base and the global ecosystem. But as a founder myself, in my second company, going to 6 countries to sell, you start to realize that, for every single new market they enter, you need to learn the language, you need to learn the marketing, you need to figure out the logistics. And I think that is the challenge. So for us, Block 71 as a whole, over time, we are trying to build up the ability for processes to be more, for knowledge and processes to be diffused to founders in a more efficient manner. I think that's been the challenge. That's why we started to move towards cohort-based training programs. Coming from Y Combinator, that kind of also shaped my thinking around how we could almost like when Ford came out with the Model T assembly, back in the days, 500 cars a minute. How do we do that for startups? How do we do it efficiently? It's not easy because they all have different industries they're tackling. We're starting to develop specialized tracks that give them the best in-class networks and advice. At the end of the day, we have to be selective for founders that really want to be consistent, right? So that over time they start paying it forward. And that's what I realized in many years in Stanford area, is that everybody pays it forward here. I hope that at least for me and our efforts at NUS Enterprise, together with my boss here, actually is right there in the NUS tag. I think both of us want to pay it forward to the point where everybody else starts to get activated and we pass the critical threshold. And then we can say that, okay, we are close to what the area offers. I don't think we are there yet. We're trying very hard.
Thank you.
Great question. I'm kind of curious about, the pattern that you represent is someone in a technical field who has an idea that can commercialize as a startup company. A lot of Asian universities have taken this thing where entrepreneurship becomes an academic specialization. And so what's it like in the technical areas of NUS? Is it very entrepreneurially minded? Or do you have this kind of growth of kind of the entrepreneurship people over there?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. Something we struggle with, right? Do we want it to be purely an academic exercise?
Yeah.
I think that certainly it helps if you have certain, if you adapt or customize frameworks to operate entrepreneurship training. But end of the day, I actually recently had this discussion, right, around entrepreneurship, whether it's a nature versus nurture and so on. And I actually looked up the dictionary definition of entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, do anybody want to take a guess what that is? Is an entrepreneur. So to cut the story short, basically it is a person who takes substantial financial risk, right? A person that takes substantial financial risk. So in that way, if you're studying and taking a class at Stanford, right, just like me, right, I was probably like a they call it wannabe entrepreneur, and I actually started a company where I actually have financial obligations to people. Now that is what makes an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right. So we want to create conditions that allow people to quickly experience that, so that they can really decide for themselves.
Yeah.
Is that somebody that they want to be, right? And are they able to do that?
That's an excellent answer to that, because I think everybody needs to taste it.
Yeah.
In order to decide whether you really want to eat the whole meal.
Right.
We have a question about the outward expansion from Singaporean startups. So do you see primarily interest in the United States coming west for startups, or the startups from Singapore going as they expand their markets?
So generally, I think it really depends on their origin, where they started, where they found the problem, right? I think some, like MICL, found the problem sort of related to more sustainable agriculture, and then they built it using, they use the raw materials, then they develop it, and then they found scale in Japan, of all places, right? So what I think is different is that the ability of different economies research at different, we call either technology readiness levels or advanced, how advanced they are, right, affects the type of companies they can build.
Yeah.
And if what the technology they're developing is suitable for a larger economy like the US, or even in this case Japan, then it might not be such a bad idea to leverage or arbitrage certain opportunities that exist. In this case, for this company, we found that there are actually a lot of assisted living spaces in Japan that's unutilized. They actually managed to get investment from a venture from Japan, use these facilities to then scale up production. Now they're actually able to meet the demand, right? So I think the ability to arbitrage between different economies is end what matters. Yeah. Because if you cannot survive financially as a company, then your runway goes over. Right.
So as a general kind of answer to the question, you're saying that people can see in many different directions from Singapore. Somehow they found this happening in Japan. Of course, a lot of Japanese companies have facilities in Singapore, but to look where the market opportunity is the best.
Yeah. So I think that is a good point. I think you're leaning towards this answer where if we can create conditions where a lot of collisions happen positively, these network effects actually take place. That's why I think Singapore has that capability, because we're very for exchange of ideas.
Okay. Other questions from the floor?
Who wants to join Block 71?
So what do you think is going to happen from now? Where will Singapore be in 10 years?
I think that's, I think over time, what I see, and honestly, sometimes I do see parallels between investment philosophies to ecosystem building in Singapore. Yeah. And one philosophy that I thought seems quite close, it's actually Warren Buffett's philosophy of sort of making sure that there's a return over time without having too much downside.
Yeah.
But you sacrifice the risk appetite. In some ways, Singapore is like that, right? We often oscillate between high risk and low risk investments, right? Through the stability that I think a society structure allows for. Singapore has that stability, in some ways we'll continue to grow. So much as long as we don't have high downsides. It's like a fixed deposit account with high interest rates.
So I want to ask you about you. Hana Life is the most recent company that's the YC funded company and now is in the growth stage. How do you manage your time? Because, okay, here you have this role within US Singapore. You're also a faculty member in US. I'm sorry, in US Enterprise. You're also a faculty member in US. You've got this startup. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's something I get asked often, right? I think for me, I just enjoy what I'm doing, right? So it's not really work, right? The question is how much bandwidth can I have in 24 hours? So the key, I think, is I try to be over time get much more efficient at what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right. This then opens up some bandwidth still to cater to family and other things. But for me, it's all about the people. I enjoy working with people. I honestly don't feel it's work. That's how I can be very efficient and surround myself with people that are much better than me. It's one way.
Okay. Do you see yourself starting another company once Hana Life exits?
Certainly, I have my third one, which is already seed funded. I'm building on another one that I'm trying, which I think can potentially address energy crisis that we are using about energy because of the AI demand.
The data centers.
Yeah, so it's pretty exciting.
Wow. Okay. That will be something to look forward to also. Any other questions? Oh, go ahead. Way back in the back.
What are you doing to help companies scale in economies that could be significantly different? I'm thinking about like the local area, like ASEAN countries, which are significantly less well off.
It's a good question, right? So we see it is that, and actually Warren Buffett recently said the same thing, is that wealthy things are a lot more stable, right? So we try to create a conduit of exchange of know-how, just like how we helped NYCL, which originated from Indonesia, to actually perform research in Singapore, right? So they arbitrage the technical know-how. They utilize our network effects of Block 71 to help them grow their business and be business development in Japan. So I think we believe that I believe, I can't say for everyone, but certainly I think that we want to be stronger as a bloc over time through exchange of ideas and people. And I think that Singapore has always been very open for business.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. What kind of advice can you give perhaps 20 years ago yourself, like a first batch of NOC, looking forward to coming to the Bay Area? So NUS undergraduate students, what kind of advice can you get them? At the same time, what kind of advice for the Stanford undergraduate students who are imagining to working in Singapore? Two questions.
Oh, I think the second one is easy. Come to Singapore as soon as possible. First question is about NOC. So I didn't actually go through that program, but I was fortunate to study at Stanford. So I actually went through a much longer duration of the program, right? So for the NOC students that may be in the audience online, right, I think seize the opportunities given here to meet as many people as you can. Because in the end, what matters when you actually do want to do a startup is the network that you actually have. Network of people, essentially. And if you don't have that, that will be very challenging, both internally as a team, right, if you're a startup team, but as well as the additional ecosystem. The way to leverage an ecosystem is really through the people network, right? And you want to be able to record down your entire list of people that you meet over time, so that you can actually leverage on the phone call. I think that's very important for the younger generation, where artificial intelligence, social media, and so on has just kind of trapped them in the digital world. But the truth is, as I've shown, the world is truly more beautiful in analog, and no machine today can replace that.
I like that. The world is more beautiful in analog. Any other questions? Oh, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm from Uzbekistan. It's a country in Central Asia. and I am researching a development of startup ecosystem in our country. And our government makes a lot of initiatives to make sure that people have lots of possibilities to improve. But fortunately, our infrastructure in country is not very good. I mean, in the capital, in Tashkent, yes, we do have internet connections, we do have computers and buildings, but in other cities, people doesn't even have computers or phones or stable internet connection. So how do you see the development of such ecosystem in Central Asia, especially in Uzbekistan?
I would love to visit your country. Chance to do that yet, but I think that a concerted effort in infrastructure investment is absolutely necessary. I was actually having a discussion with Xian, right? So when he was traveling through the mountains between different countries, he realized that Southeast Asia, they actually have leapfrog infrastructure built up by having 4G networks even in the most remote parts of the country. And that country, one of the country happens to be Vietnam, right? So by being so heavily networked, you start to see that, I also cited Vietnam. There was a tremendous growth in the income per capita over the last 20 years, right? 11 times. Definitely not easy. And I think that such infrastructure actually creates a net compounding effect over the years. Because at the end of the day, what matters is people that have access to information. So you have to reduce the friction and the cost of people having access to information. I think in different countries, the political situation, the social structure may make that challenge. So I think that the government essentially would have to decide whether they want people to be innovative. To do that, they need the right infrastructure. But it may be actually more cost effective to build a wireless infrastructure than a cable one, for example. The cost isn't too high.
Well, I think that now may be a good time to close the formal part of the program and move outside over some refreshments and have some more informal discussion. I want to say thanks to everyone for coming. Rahima, thanks for visiting us from Uzbekistan today.
Thank you.
Delighted you could come. So our next program will be next Tuesday at this same time. Dr. T, thank you so much for your presentation.